The imagination, our imaginations, have prompts in them. They are the things that give you the story. But they are not the obvious things. They are the things which present a kind of puzzle to us. Why should I be thinking of that? What is it that, why is it that I get stuck on this thing? Why do I hear this particular piece of music over and over? Why does the color orange bother me so much? Why is it that I love the elegance of the eucalyptus tree? You know, those are the prompts of the imagination. And you need to follow them in understanding what their content is. Every story, I think, even the most, even ones that are the most commercially, that you create simply for commercial consumption, begins with some kind of image in your head, and the role of that image is very important because it is the thing which tells you what the deep content of the story is. And you need to know what the content is because otherwise you can never understand why it is that you should select something or why you should reject something. The generative image, what I mean by that, is not necessarily at all the first image in a film. But it is the image which you go back to when you feel that, you know, it's late at night, you're very frustrated, you don't know whether the story is going to make any sense or not. You're questioning everything. And you say, what is this story about? And there is something in the back of your mind which tells you this story needs to be written. Now, the thing that is important about it, and the reason why I stress that it's an image, is that the content of that and understanding it is a matter of what you see in it. And let me give an example of something that may or may not have been a generative image for the people who wrote this, but is something that we could use as an example from a very, very famous film. Sergio, what do you see in the last shot?
He's moving.
He's moving, and he's moving
with his child, with people.
Into the group of people, right? And if you notice, before the child takes his hand, even though he's moving, it's like, exactly, he's not getting out of the way of anything. He's not fluid, you know, it's like he's moving, but he's like a rock, he's like still. And then the child takes his hand, and he starts to cry, and he loosens and he joins the thing. So you could say that the whole film is about the movement of this man from this stationary position at the beginning to his movement with the crowd at the end. And if you look at the film, the use of the crowd and the use of movement versus his aloneness is a constant theme in the film. What does that image tell us about what the film is about? I won't pester you. To me, as a sense of the generative image, it is an image of what the film is about human solidarity. It is about somebody who is very private in his sense of his own suffering and who broods on it. We talk about characters having an action, doing something. Ricci, the main character to me, he broods. He's always thinking about things. There's a great scene in this in which they can't find the goddamn bike, and they've gone through a terrible experience, and he's just hit his child, and he's desperate to make up, and he says to the kid, come on, let's go, and would you like a pizza? So they say, the kid says, I'd love a pizza. So they go, of course, the place he goes into, it doesn't serve pizza. So, but it serves mozzarella and corazza, right? Right. So, you know, the band is playing, and they're happy, and the kid is delighted that he's there with his dad, and they sit down and they start to eat. The kid's digging into his mozzarella, and Ricci goes, my God, you know, if I had only had that job, think of how much money I would have had. 4,000 lira per month, $2,800 lira for overtime. He starts adding it up. Then he can't do it. He can't calculate fast enough. So he says to the kid, wait a second, you do the addition. And the kid has to stop eating to do the addition because he's brooding all the time. He never lets it go. And in never letting it go and being that, he remains an isolated human being. And the film is about his transformation into somebody who is part of this humanity, a humanity that is in motion. And the image of that is this moment, of course, which is so justly famous, of the little boy taking his hand, in which Ricci becomes part of humanity. And this image of shared understanding between the boy and the father is an image that lasts because it is an image, to my mind, if you're thinking of how to put it in words, of what I call this thing of human solidarity. If you did a step-by-step outline of the bicycle thief, the whole content of what I'm just talking about would never appear. But when you begin to think about it as a study of images, and as a story told in images, and as a story conceived in images, then that deeper meaning appears. All of you, I believe, have some generative image for your story. There was some moment where you thought, I like that. I can write that. What you need to do is to think about what you see in the image. Not what you think about the image, what you see in the image. Let me give an example of that. I was talking to Pirosh, and she has an idea for a film. I won't go into the content of the story, but so we're talking, you know, and presumably developing, right? You know, well, it could be this character, it could be that character. And it's all horseshit, unless you know what the story is about. Because the choices are completely arbitrary. You know, if you don't know what the story is about, if you don't know what it is that you want to convey. If you know that you want to convey the story about somebody becoming part of humanity, then you know his journey, and you know the steps of that. If you don't, boom, you don't. Okay. I'm talking to Pirosh, and I say, Pirosh, it's good, but what the fuck is this story about? I don't know, So I said, well, okay. What you started this story with an image. And she said, and it was an image of a road, an empty place, and a road, and two cars coming down the road, and they crash into each other. And I said, well, where did it come from? And she said, well, there was some kind of crash like that. And then she said, and the thing was, what I thought was, that these two cars were coming, that if either of them had moved just centimeters to either side, the crash wouldn't have happened. So I said, so it's a story about being trapped. Because if you think about what she was saying, it was that the cars couldn't move any other way, and that they were locked into this thing, and that was going to happen. And then a whole world of story opens up, because now you know what your characters are about. Your characters are about people who are trapped. They can be trapped physically in the car. They can be trapped in terms of emotionally, in terms of their lives. They can be trapped socially. You know what your dramatic action can be, in that the trap gets worse and worse over the course of the story. You know also what the overall action is, because the overall action is they're either going to be freed from this trap, or they're going to, be destroyed by it. The generative image, the image that first spoke to you in terms of the story, gives you the content of the story, and it is a different content than the one that is formed in your mind as a statement. It's not men looking for work. It's people in movement. There's a big difference between those two things. One is an abstraction, an idea taken from what you see. The other is what you see in and of itself. And that's what you need to address. that in Italian?
Si allena, yeah. Allenarsi.
Shadow boxing.
Si scalda.
Shadow boxing. And with the shadow that he's boxing is what? And what's the movie about? That's it. 2.5 hours of a fucking movie. One image. That's what the movie is about. That's the power of the image. That's why it grabs you. That's why you remember it. And everything then in the movie got to get to that action. That's how you select. Is this scene valuable or is it not? Does it take him further or away from this battle that he has with himself, which is reflected then in the climax of the movie, where he's brought into, have you all seen the movie? Where he's brought into the cell, and do you remember what he does in the cell? He goes from shadow boxing to literally banging his head against the wall, beating himself up, saying, I am not an animal. I'm not an animal, I'm not an animal, I'm not an animal. That's the climax of the film. The reason why it's the climax of the film is because it's been set up here. But if you were to say, again, what is Raging Bull about, it's not that you would come up with a lot of answers, none of which express the actual content and the dramatic content of the story. Now, you all have those generative images inside. If you don't, then you should not write the story. As simple as that. Because it means you don't know what the fuck you're writing. If you have it, if you can remember the moment at which you began to think, this is a story, ask yourself what it is that you see in that image. Not what you think you see, but what is it? Is it isolation? Is it torture? Is it joy? Is it contrast? Whatever that is, that gives you the first step towards understanding the content of your film. The desperation of the main character, which is actually his heroic nature, grows throughout the course of the film. It is your job to present the character with the events and with the circumstances that give him or her the chance to make choices that let them become bigger than who they are at the beginning. Now, alternately, at the beginning, the antagonist is huge. The antagonist is a force. And I think it's better to talk about an antagonistic force than an antagonist, per se. You think about Oedipus Rex. What is the antagonist in Oedipus Rex, you know? Well, at the beginning of the thing, it's that there's a plague. Now, in the course of the story, the plague, of course, takes on many incarnations. The plague is first it's a plague, then it's the prophecy, then it's his fate, then it's also his inability to escape that fate, etc. But at the beginning, and they make it very clear in the chorus, the thing that is destructive is something huge, is this thing, this plague that has come, that is killing this town, that is actually in the process of destroying this civilization, killing the mothers, killing the children, etc. In Hamlet, the antagonist is everything that's wrong in the state of Denmark. That's what he says. It's everything. It's that he's this guy and this whole place is completely fucked up. His mother has married his uncle, his father is dead, there's a lot of fog going around, there's a Polish guy at the border, there's a Swedish guy coming down from the north, the kingdom is falling apart, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. It's a big thing. Now, over the course of the story, the antagonist takes on different incarnations. And the incarnations become more and more and more specific. Until finally, they become one specific thing, which the protagonist is either going to defeat or is going to be defeated by. So in Oedipus Rex, all of that stuff ends up with the final scene in which, with his eyes bleeding and his wife dead and all the rest of it, he tries once more to be king and to command what is going on. And Creon says to him, "You're not the king anymore. You do what I tell you to. You go." And he has been completely humbled by the enactment of, which is through his own actions, his fate. In Hamlet, it ends up with a little conspiracy between Claudius and Laertes, and a poison tip on the sword. All of that stuff that in the beginning looms so large, etc., ends up with one specific thing. Now, in your story, it doesn't matter if it's a comedy, if it's a drama, if it's a dramatic comedy, it doesn't matter, black, dark comedy, whatever. Your antagonist, you have to know. Let me repeat that, because you will not believe this, and you will not understand it, but I will insist upon it. You have to know who your antagonist is. Why? Because if you don't know who the antagonist is, you don't know what the subject of the story is. You don't know who the protagonist is fighting. You don't know what the structure is. If I know that the antagonist of the story of Jaws is evil in the form of a shark, then I know exactly where it is that I have to go, and I know what it is that I want to show about that shark. I want to show people's reactions to evil, and I want the hero to go to a point where he is face to face with the shark. That's where the story has to go. If I don't know that, if I am not sure of that, I don't know where the story is going. If you don't know what your antagonist is, at this point, as you sit in this room right now, if I say to you, "What's your antagonist?" and you don't have an answer, it means you better find one. Because otherwise you have no way of knowing where your story is going. And if your answer is too general, then you have to define it more. Now, in this structural thing, what happens is that you have this first moment where the hero, or the protagonist, finds himself in the world of the antagonist. Now, it doesn't mean that he's up against the antagonist. It doesn't mean that he jumps or she jumps in. The tendency in movies now is to make the story about a hero who immediately throws himself or herself into the struggle. That is not what people do. If you're a sheriff on a small island and there's a big shark going around eating people alive, you do not say, "I'm going to get into a boat and go out and kill the shark." You just do not do that. And it would make the story very, very boring if you did. So what happens is you have to have a movement of the protagonist into the world of the antagonist. So first the antagonist comes into the world, and then his presence is felt in the world, and by the end of the first act, which is the big line there, the protagonist has entered into the world of the antagonist. It doesn't mean that the protagonist has decided that he is going to kill the antagonist, because the protagonist would be scared. Hamlet doesn't decide. Hamlet sees the ghost. The ghost tells him, "Your uncle killed me. I am suffering because I'm walking around here in limbo. I can't sleep at night. I'm really tired. And what's more, there's a scandal on the state of Denmark. Does Hamlet at that point go and get a sword and kill Claudius? No. And it's not because he's a fucked up neurotic guy. It's because it would be a big deal if he went and gotten a sword and killed Claudius at that moment. He needs time to make the decisions that take him to that point. He needs time to realize that that's what he's going to have to do. So he enters into the world of the antagonist. And the second act, from there to there, is the process by which the protagonist tries to get whatever it is that he or she needs without confronting the antagonist. Hamlet tries to make the situation better without attacking Claudius directly. Because, you know, Brody, the sheriff in Jaws, tries to get rid of the shark every way possible, but by killing the shark directly. That's your second act development. So you need to find the ways in which the character knows that they have to do something in terms of the antagonist, but are trying to do it short of a direct confrontation itself. At the end of the second act, they discover there is no way to do that except to attack the protagonist directly, the antagonist directly. So they do. And we have a beat in which we think that there is a success and that somehow the protagonist has faced the antagonist without having to confront him directly. So in Oedipus Rex, he comes out blinded, but he still thinks he's king. In Hamlet, he thinks he can go into the duel, but he doesn't know that the swords are poisoned, etc. And then at the end, they find out that they can't, that they have to face the antagonist directly. There is the climax, and your film is over. I was talking to Vasilis and Stelios today about this story. I am sure that if I asked them what is the antagonist of their story, they would say, the antagonist of their story maybe is the modern world. Because it has to do, their story, with two different people's reaction to that world. One person accepts it, loves it, the other person hates it, right? That may be right, it may be wrong, but that gives you some place to go. Now it means that you have to find who and what in the story is the precise definition of that modern world for the characters. And it means that you have to come up with some moment at the end in which they confront that expression of the modern world. Now you begin to have a structure. Now you begin to have a story. There's a plot, and then there's the story. The plot is the series of causal events that happen in the story. The cause and effect events that bring the story from beginning to end. The story or the action, which is underneath that, is the internal development of the character. And So that's the outer, and this is the inner. And there is a absolute relationship between these two things. The inner development of the character is crucial in terms of the story, because as you see in the diagram, in the middle, there is a peak. And that peak, which is the exact middle of the film, is the moment at which the protagonist has a last chance to get out of the world of the antagonist and does not do it. But he does not, or she does not do it because of the plot. They do it because of their internal development and another storyline that is going on. The plot of On the Waterfront is to find the murderer of Joey Doyle. The story starts with a guy being pushed off a roof. Our hero is responsible for it. He has to redeem himself. The only way he can redeem himself is by finding the real murderer of this guy, who is the boss, Lee J. Cobb. That's the end of the story. The plot are the causal series of events that take him to do that. But in the middle of the story, he would never do it unless he met Edie. Because Edie and his love for her changes, which we'll see in a scene, his whole understanding of himself, etc. And the moment that he realizes that his desire and love for her is greater than his fear and insecurity that leads him to being a member of this gang, is the exact midpoint of the film. Now, frequently, that is a thing which happens when there is something that is introduced in the first act that we don't know about, but that comes up and emerges in the second act. And a great example of that, again, is in Oedipus Rex. In Oedipus Rex, though, I don't know if it's been remarked upon that much. You know, Oedipus goes and he finds out and he says, okay, who's the, blah, blah, blah. And then Tiresias comes, the blind seer, and they have this argument, and Tiresias says, you're the cause of it. He doesn't listen. Creon comes, he has a big fight, etc. And it's the middle of the play. And he's done whatever it is that he could do. There's nothing more that Oedipus can do at that point to find out what's going on. And Jocasta, his big-mouthed wife, comes along. And she wants to make him feel better. And she says, oh, Oedipus, what are you talking about? Don't worry about that stuff. You know that there are all kinds of dreams in which guys sleep with their mothers. And you know their prophecies are so silly. We were told that Elias's son was going to go and kill his father. And it never happened. He was killed by a bunch of highwaymen, blah, blah, blah. She says this to reassure him. And he goes, oh my God, what have you, he says, that was something that happened to me. I have to find out what this thing is. And then he pursues it, and he sends for the messenger and the huntsman, and it comes out, and the second half of the play begins. And it unravels, and he ends up blinding himself. Without her saying that, the story stops. In Hamlet, if the players don't come along, the story stops. You need to have devices in your story that will spring the action, because otherwise, the main character, the protagonist, is going to be doing all the work, and we are going to lose our identity with him. Now, okay, now, there is a relationship between the plot, the external, and the inner development. It is a dynamic relationship. It is not a static relationship. And let's go to Jaws. You all know Jaws. You've all seen Jaws, right? Right? Okay. Just to do it. In Jaws, yeah, let's look at the scene number 5. We've met the sheriff, Brody, a nice, quiet guy who has just moved to this island to take care of to be sheriff, and who's an outsider also. And he's going to close the beaches, and the local mayor, etc., come to him and they say, look, it's July 4th. If you close the beaches, it's going to screw up everything. We live on our tourist dollars. Don't close the beaches, etc. Brody decides not to close the beaches. And so the beaches opened and everybody is playing on it. Okay, here we go. What do you see with the kid? How do you know the kid is the kid? How is he identified? You got the red swimming suit, okay? So when you got your characters, etc., give them the clue so that we can follow it, you know? So that, do we know how important this kid is going to be in the scene? No. But he's going to be important. You'll see why. Alex loves to play in the water. And he looks cute in his red suit.
Just 10 more minutes.
And then we have the sheep. Right. There's a dog barking. The chief is watching the water because he knows the shark is out there. He doesn't know where it is, and he's opening, so he's nervous. Okay. So now we have the thing of the dog barking and the kid going in. Now, incidentally, this thing that we're about to see is one of the great, it's structured sequences. So it's almost like it's like a piece of music the way he does it. You know, he has the fat woman coming in. You set up your markers for the sequence. So he has, you know, the fat woman. Then he has the kid on the raft with the red bathing suit. Then he has the dog, etc. And you'll see how he brings this together in a kind of symphonic climax. And you got the sheriff. So there's the dog. There's the person. Fat lady floating. He's looking. There's the kid on the raft. There's the dog. Brody's looking. There's the fat lady. Everything's okay. That's Brody's wife. Uh-oh, what's that? What is that? Is that a shark? No. It's this idiotic old man coming up out of the water. Jesus Christ. All right. He's keeping on trying to look over his shoulder. Oh, there's somebody screaming. He jumps up. No, it's just a girl. And his wife is not too helpful. So the kids go in the water, and now everybody's going in the water. And now we don't know about this yet, that he doesn't go in the water. There are his sons. And there are the kids. A lot of shouting, a lot of splashing.
No dog.
So the first marker now comes through. No dog. And now we have the presence of the antagonist.
You were not laughing at me on the first time.
And who is that? Look at the shot. He runs in the water. Look at the hat. How helpless that makes her. The internal development of this character is that he is a sheriff. That's what we're told. He's a sheriff. What does a sheriff do? What does a sheriff do? Give me an action that a sheriff does.
Protects the community.
Exactly. The sheriff protects the community. Well, a sheriff protects. Now, what do you see of his behavior in that scene? What does he do?
Anxious.
No. Yeah, what does he do?
Looks. Watch.
He watches. Does he go in the water?
You can't get into the water.
Why?
Well, we have some hints at this. I mean, there is the old guy saying, I've been told that you can't get into the water. So it's an oxymoron.
It's an oxymoron. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. He wants to protect, but if his action is to protect, it is also to protect himself, correct? And if he protects himself in that instance, he doesn't go in the water. So the internal development of this character is that he becomes a true sheriff in the course of the film, in which he ends up protecting others and sacrificing his own safety for them. And basically, what you have in the relationship between the external plot and the internal development is, and if we could do this by a series of lines going back and forth, one, you have the shark attacking the girl. So bring that all the way down to the inner line. And that is Brody knowing that he's the sheriff, he has to do something. So since he has the sheriff and he has to do something, bring the line up from the inner development to the right. He says we should close down the beach, right? That's a plot point. Because he says we should close down the beach, the other people say to him, no, don't do that because it's bad for business. And we go back down, draw a line back down from Brody, and he has to decide whether or not he is going to protect his job or whether he is going to do what he thinks is really right, and he makes the wrong choice. And because he makes the wrong choice, do the line back up. the kid is killed. And because the kid is killed, do the line back down, he feels guilty. And because he feels guilty, the next day, he's walking in the street, and he sees the mother of the child who was killed, and she comes over to him, and she slaps him in the face, and she says to him, Chief Brody, you killed my child. And then he has the choice of either saying, fuck you, I'm just the sheriff of this town, I'm not doing anything, or you're right, I am guilty, I must enter into the world of the antagonist and get this shark. And you have the beginning of the second act. So you have this back and forth between these two things. Now, in this, it's whether or not he's a sheriff. It could, in other stories, it's a love story. In other stories, it's other things. But you need to have that back and forth so that the protagonist is entering into the world of the antagonist. Now, the other thing I want to say here, and then we'll take a break, is that if you look at that scene, does Brody know at the beginning of that scene what he would do if he saw a shark attack one of the kids? Does he know what he would do in that instance? At the end of the scene, what does he know? Huh?
He says this, doesn't
That he's a coward. So it's a transitional scene. Now, the scenes in drama that are transition are the key scenes. And they're the scenes that you build your sequences, that you focus on in terms of your sequences. Now, if I was an alien, and in my room at the apartment where I'm staying, there is a picture of a seacoast in Greece with large squids stretched out on the wire, you know, above the sea, and they look to me like aliens. So if one of those aliens came down, and he didn't know you from Adam, Stefano, or he didn't know you, Michelle, and he came into this room at, say, the last 2 minutes of the lecture, what would they find out about you? They'd know you were a screenwriter, a writer, a director, because you're in this thing. They know from the way that you were listening to the lecture, your attitude. You'd be sleeping, you'd be laughing, you'd be listening very attentively. The lecture would end. You would be the first to jump up and to go out because you're desperate to make sure that you're at the door when she walks out so that you can stick your feet up and accidentally trip her and then say to her, I knew I could make you fall for me. And then she'd say, I do, let's go get something to eat. And you'd say, why get something to eat? I'm a fantastic cook. Why don't you just do that? And I've got some stuff, and we can go to the beach. And you go to the beach, and you give her your cooking, and we find out that you're a fantastic swimmer, and an incredible seducer. And that you're a serial killer. I'm sorry. A small sacrifice for man. We wouldn't know what your life was. You wouldn't have any 10 minutes of setting up your life and But we'd know so much about your life. So you can find out about your characters through immediately putting them into action. It doesn't have to be the action of them entering the world of the antagonist, but it has to be that they're in some, what I call, dramatic circumstance, some moment of change in their life. In Jaws, the moment of change in his life is that he has just moved to this island, and he has just become sheriff, and he doesn't know any of the responsibilities of the job, etc. And the action that he's playing is taking care of the town before the shark attacks. But it's an action. It's not something where it's just slapped on the plate so that you are going, oh, I see, oh, I see, oh, I see. It's not static. Now, if you think of the character in that way, as an active character, immediately the milieu, the circumstances of the character emerge. And there are many of them. One is the dramatic circumstance. Where is the character in relationship to her or his life? At what point of change do you start the story? One is the social circumstance. Where are they living? What is it like? I mean, almost none of you spend any time thinking about that. I was talking to Oriana and, I'm sorry, and Jan. And they have a story, and it's set in contemporary Poland. And it's set in contemporary Poland, but we sort of drag this out of them. And it's set in contemporary Poland among really the women who live in contemporary Poland. Now, I don't know if you went along with any of the ideas that we talked about or not. But before we started talking about that, it was like one character, the main character. Then we started talking, and you say, well, okay, I want to show what it's like to be a woman in Poland today. So I want to have a character who's a radical militant ex-Solidarity person, and another one who's an old party hack, and a young woman who's this, and another one who's very religious, and blah, blah, blah. You begin to populate your film. Now, you may not use all those characters, but some of them can be useful in terms of moving the main character along. But you won't get them unless you understand what the social circumstance of the story is. There's also other kinds of circumstance. There's geographical circumstance. The opening of The Seventh Seal, you know, the Bergman film. Do any of you remember the opening, what you see? The opening shot? Rocks. Why is it rocks? Because this is where nothing grows. You are in hell. There is devastation. You got rocks and you got water. Spielberg will often make his films in the geographical circumstance of suburban housing development. Films that are set, Giovanni and I were talking about The Sheltering Sky. Nobody remembers the story of The Sheltering Sky, but everybody remembers the visuals of the Sheltering Sky. So you can have these things, and the more you develop them, and the more they come out of your generative image, the more that as you understand what the dramatic material of your story is, the more you can use them. In Bicycle Thief, whether he's aware of it or not, and I'm sure he was, there are constant visual references to the city of Rome and the movement of people in the city of Rome. The guys going to work. There's an incredible scene in the morning when Ricci gets his bicycle and he's going to go to work for the first time. And he gets on the bicycle with his boy and he joins the whole mass of people going off to work, and it's this incredible arc of humanity moving through. this gorgeous music, you know, full of hope and everything like that. That's part of the that's part of the circumstances of the story. The more you have them, the more material you can develop, as long as it is related to whatever the central action of the story is. Which goes back to what it is that we were talking about. Now, you know, in Jaws, the central action is, what do you do in the face of evil? Everything goes back to that. Every character goes back to that. Every incident goes back to that. Every visual goes back to that. So, you know, I hope that all of these things that we've been talking about will actually help you in developing your stories. Nobody knows whether you're a good writer or a bad writer. You know, nobody knows whether your story is worth anything or not. And, you know, if you're going to work on a story, you're going to end up spending a long time. The only reason to do that is because you have something to say. I mean, every script, even the most commercial ones, ultimately, the person who wrote it has something to say. You know who Shane Black is? Shane Black wrote Lethal Weapon. When Lethal Weapon came out, Shane Black was considered the most commercial writer in the world. Shane Black now considers himself a great artist, I mean, and an independent voice in cinema, because he can't sell a script. He has to make his own movies. If you asked him when he wrote Lethal Weapon, are you just writing a commercial script? No, Lethal Weapon is actually about something. That's why it's a good little script. It's about a guy who wants to kill himself and finds out that he doesn't have to. It's actually about something. Everything that, you know, you remember is about something. It has a weight to it. You got to bring that weight into your own stories. Otherwise, all the work that you will do will be absolutely meaningless, and you just shouldn't do it. Don't waste your time. You know, you're not going to know whether your script is good or bad. You don't know whether you can write it or not. But what you can know is whether your effort in doing it is an honest effort. And whether or not you are finding out something about your story and yourself and what it is that you want to say while you're doing it. And all of these things that we're talking about are structures which you can use to help find out what that image is that first speaks to you to make the story in the first place. Okay? Thank you very much.